In 2001, I and several friends sailed my 42-foot ketch from the Chesapeake to Bermuda and back. This video covers the trip from Bermuda back to the Chesapeake Bay. On the day before departing Bermuda, we changed the oil in the engine and noticed that the bearings in the coolant pump were badly worn. We were in a hurry to get cleaned up for a cocktail party and dinner, and decided the pump would likely last for the return trip. In any case, I had a spare on board, and we could change the pump underway. What could be wrong with that plan? The weather chart on the night before our departure showed a fairly strong pressure gradient between the Bermuda high pressure ridge to our east and a cold front moving off the U.S. East Coast. We would encounter that front in a few days, but in the meantime, we would have a fair wind. It appeared we would not have the concern of the previous leg for the amount of fuel in the tank. Be careful what you wish for. As we motored back to St. George's to clear out of Bermuda, we were passed by a very distinctive-looking cruise ship. This is the Pacific Princess, or the Love Boat as it was known in the TV series. Later that day, we watched Bermuda dip below the horizon as we sailed back to the U.S. The weather chart for that evening showed the front about halfway between us and the U.S. East Coast. A low-pressure system over the Midwest was expected to pull the front back to the north, possibly above our route to the Chesapeake. In the meantime, we had good sailing. The bedsheet bimini had now been replaced by a tarp bimini. By the second night at sea, the front was weakening, and so were the winds. During that night, we started the engine, but had to shut it down again when a loud metallic noise was coming from the engine compartment. That coolant pump had seized. We waited till daylight to replace it. That pump was likely original equipment on this 30-year-old engine. When Dick attempted to remove the pump, the head on one of the machine screws broke off. He found another screw had a completely rounded head. Maybe the previous owner had attempted to replace the pump and gave up. In any case, we now had an inoperative engine and would have to sail all the way back to the U.S. So now we had no concern about how much fuel was in the tank. We did have a generator so we could maintain electrical power and keep the batteries charged. Also, the wind had filled in, and we were making good time to the west-northwest. Although the front had pulled back to the north of our route, there was some nasty weather in our way. By the next afternoon, we were encountering moderate rain and building seas.
Andy. There's John. Looks a lot of...
Welcome to the wet and wonderful Sargasso Sea. It looks like we're going through a trough system right now. We expect to be in this conditions for about another 4 or 5 hours before we break loose of it. Low pressure systems circulation is forming just to the north of us, which is making this a little rougher to get warm food for probably another at least 10 hours until we get through this. Then we've got a couple more to look forward to, just like this, before we get into Chesapeake Bay.
It's the complete opposite of our trip here.
How opposite?
Well, we had no wind, no waves, no rain the whole way here. The way back we have all wind, all waves, and all rain.
I think that's enough.
We were expecting a rough night. Dick was preparing sandwiches, as there would be no dinner this evening. This chart shows some of the strong winds we encountered that night. It was a rough passage. The next day we were almost glad to see a near calm, as it gave us time to get some rest and dry out. The winds remained light for the rest of the day, but we were able to resume sailing. dinner in the cockpit as the sun sets. Life is good, even without an engine.
One more step. The original recipe. Never before made, probably never again to be made.
That same old cold front passed south of us that night, and the winds began to fill in once again. By mid-morning, we had partially furled the Genoa and set a reef in the main in 15 to 20 knots of wind. Now we were really sailing. As we approached the east coast, another cold front was coming our way. This one a little more intense than the last one. We were hit with a few squall lines ahead of the front. We were also approaching the Gulf Stream, which can be very rough if not threatening in a strong northerly wind, as we would likely encounter after the frontal passage. While waiting for what that front would bring, Frank used the single sideband radio to contact a boatyard in Little Creek, Virginia, to have a mechanic available when we hopefully arrived tomorrow afternoon.
What you doing, Frank? The life of the radio operator. Down in the hole.
The front turned out to be another non-event. The wind did shift to the north, but the seas never developed. We lost the tarp in the rough weather, so it was back to a bedsheet bimini. As we neared the coast, we started to see other vessels for the first time since Bermuda. That evening, we enjoyed what we hoped would be our last sunset in the ocean. Since the frontal passage, the winds had grown lighter and lighter. I wasn't sure the winds would last long enough to get us into the Chesapeake Bay.
He's going about 15 knots now.
Now we were back in the Navy's pond once again. The Chesapeake Light is just visible as the submarine passes in front of it. We had Cape Henry in sight, but we were also becalmed. This time we were able to use the VHF radio to contact Towboat US and have them tow us into Little Creek. There was a mechanic standing by in Little Creek, and we didn't want to have him go home before we arrived. Also, this was Friday. Most of us, myself included, were expected at work on Monday. I didn't want to find out how difficult it was to commute to DC from Little Creek.
Oh, yeah. It's the pump that you're saying. You got all the bolts out, but the pump is still on. Yeah, okay.
It took a little over an hour for the mechanic to remove the old pump and install the new one. This time, we didn't need to take on any fuel in Little Creek, and we were shortly heading up the bay for the Patuxent River. The next morning, we had the Calvert Cliffs in sight. Sarah was berthed in Town Creek by mid-afternoon, and our Bermuda cruise was complete.